I've spent over 2 decades in real estate turning distressed properties into gold, but nothing braced me for the neon yellow notice jabbed into my lawn last Monday. I'm Barron, a low-profile investor who thrives on quiet deals, and there it was, a $350 fine from the HOA because my golden retriever Max barked 4 times when the delivery guy thumped my door. 4 barks, hardly a riot. The mastermind behind this absurdity is Karen Delaney, our HOA president, a tyrant armed with a purple pen and a notebook fatter than a tax code. She's morphed this neighborhood into her personal soundproof kingdom, enforcing rules so ridiculous they'd baffle a toddler. What Karen doesn't suspect is that for 6 years, I've been silently buying up 70% of the HOA's budget and assets, parks, pools, cash reserves, through my firm Horizon Realty. It's a strategy honed from years of outmaneuvering bigger players, but now it's war. She struts around, smug as a peacock, clueless that I hold the financial reins of her petty empire. How will she react when this unassuming deal-maker reveals he's bankrolling her whole operation? Will she fold like a bad hand or dig in deeper? I've toppled tougher foes with less leverage, but Karen's a breed of her own, stubborn and shrill. Welcome to my tale. Stick around if you relish seeing an HOA despot humbled by a guy who's mastered the art of staying under the radar. Max might even let out a victory bark when it's over. Hit subscribe if you're up for more stories of small-time power clashing with big-time payback. This one's been brewing longer than my morning coffee, and it's about to boil over. I yanked the neon yellow notice from the grass, squinting at it under the Monday sunrise. Fine. $350, excessive dog barking, 4 instances/day, violation of Regulation 12.4 noise control. 4 barks? I nearly choked on my coffee. Max, my 5-year-old golden retriever, has been my loyal shadow since I scooped him from a shelter, a steady anchor in a life spent chasing property deals from coast to coast. He's not some yapping pest. He lets out a few woofs when someone approaches the house, like yesterday when the delivery guy pounded the door with a package. 4 quick barks, then he flopped back onto the porch, tail wagging lazily. In Karen's twisted universe, that's a capital offense. From my office window, I spotted her across the street, Karen Delaney, our HOA president, decked out in a loud green tracksuit that screamed discount rack. She waved a cheap decibel meter like it was a badge of honor, scribbling furiously in her overstuffed notebook. Her voice drifted over, "This dog's ruining our upscale charm." Her purple pen flashed in the sunlight as she adjusted her oversized sunglasses, the kind you'd see on a retiree playing bingo. My wife Claire poked her head in from the kitchen, a dish towel slung over her shoulder. "Barron, she's at it again. Should we crate Max when the mail comes?" I shook my head, jaw tight. No way. I'm not locking him up because Karen's allergic to anything alive. Her nonsense was nothing new. I'd watched her slap Mr. Peterson with a $120 fine last month because his blender whirred too loud at 8 a.m. She called it disruptive to morning peace. Meanwhile, her husband's Harley roars through the cul-de-sac every Sunday, rattling windows, and she doesn't bat an eye. She once emailed the whole neighborhood banning whistling on porches, claiming it disturbed communal harmony. Yet her front yard's a garish display of Christmas lights that buzz like a swarm of bees all year round. No fines there, of course. It's selective enforcement at its finest, and I'd been cataloging it since I moved in. 6 years ago, I landed here after flipping a strip mall in Denver for a tidy profit. The HOA was already a mess, teetering on bankruptcy after Karen funneled $30,000 of community funds into paving her personal tennis court, which she dubbed a neighborhood upgrade. Most residents grumbled, but forked over their dues anyway. Not me. I'd been in real estate since I was 22, cutting my teeth on foreclosures during the 90s crash. And I don't sit still when I smell a sinking investment. Through Horizon Realty, my low-key operation, I started buying up the HOA's debt from the bank. Quietly, methodically, I took control of their assets, the park with its rickety swings, the pool with its chipped tiles, the maintenance fund they'd all but drained. By last year, I owned 70% of their budget. It was a safeguard at first, protecting my property value if these amateurs tanked the place, but now it was personal. I leaned back in my leather chair, sipping my coffee, replaying how Max came into my life. It was after a brutal loss in Chicago, A high-rise deal I'd chased for months, only to watch it slip away to some hotshot with deeper pockets. I was burned out, pacing the empty lots of my latest flip, when I stopped by the shelter on a whim. Max bounded over, all floppy ears and goofy grin. And that was it. He was mine. He's no guard dog, just a big, lovable lug who barks at strangers and then begs for belly rubs. But to Karen, he's a menace, disrupting her pristine fantasy land. I watched her stomp off down the street, her sandals slapping the pavement like an angry metronome, probably dreaming up new ways to make my life hell. She had no clue who she was tangling with. Claire slid a fresh mug onto my desk, steam curling up. She's unhinged, Baron. Last week she told Mrs. Ellis her wind chimes were sonic pollution. What's next? Fining us for breathing too loud? I chuckled, but my mind was already turning. Karen's power rested on petty fines and intimidation, and I'd documented every overstep. I'd sat through HOA meetings via proxies, tenants and properties I'd scooped up around the neighborhood, watching her penalize people for the dumbest things, like when she charged Mrs. Jenkins $150 because her grandkid's tricycle squeaked too much on the driveway. Meanwhile, Karen's teenage son blasts his subwoofer till midnight, and she calls it youthful spirit. Selective isn't even cover it. I fired up my laptop, pulling up Horizon Realty's latest filings. The numbers glowed on the screen. 70% of the HOA's cash flow ran through my accounts. I'd kept it under wraps, using shell LLCs to mask my moves, a trick I'd perfected flipping condos in Miami back in the day. Karen thought she ruled this little kingdom, but I held the real power. Max scratched at the door, whining for his morning walk. I grabbed his leash and stepped outside just as Karen glanced back from Mr. Peterson's driveway, where she was measuring his mailbox with a tape measure. Probably another unapproved width violation brewing. I waved, slow and deliberate, letting her think she'd won this round. She smirked and turned away, her purple pen still clutched like a scepter. Rookie mistake. I'd played this tricky game far too long to flinch. In real estate, you don't rush. You watch, you wait, you strike. I'd turned crumbling warehouses into luxury lofts, snatched foreclosed homes from under Wall Street's nose, and built a fortune staying one step ahead. Karen was a small-time bully stumbling into a big-time trap, and I'd spent years setting the bait. She wanted to find me for Max's barks? Fine, I'd hit back with something she couldn't dodge. Cold, hard numbers. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the lawn. I let Max sniff the grass, his tail wagging like a metronome, while I plotted my next move. Karen craved a fight. She'd get one she'd never see coming. Wednesday turned up the heat. A new notice slid under my door like a coward's whisper. Fine increased to $600, failure to stop barking within 24 hours. I stared at it, shaking my head in disbelief. Karen wasn't messing around anymore. She was out for blood. That afternoon, I caught her rigging a tiny microphone to my fence post, its red light blinking like a cheap toy as Max let out a single bark at a jogger passing by. She'd slapped it on with bright orange duct tape like some half-baked spy from a dollar store. By evening, she'd posted the clip, 3 measly woofs, on the HOA Facebook group with a melodramatic caption, "This is the threat to our tranquility." Her loyal posse chimed in with disgraceful and unacceptable, while saner folks just dropped eye-roll emojis and moved on. Thursday morning, I watched from my porch, a glass of bourbon in hand as Karen took it to another level. She stood in the street, megaphone pressed to her lips, shouting, "Dog barking lowers property values. It's a proven stressor for children." Max tilted his head, oblivious, chewing on a soggy tennis ball. The nearest kid lives 3 houses down and blasts a trumpet every evening, loud enough to wake the dead. But Karen's never uttered a peep about that. Claire stepped out, arms crossed, her blonde hair catching the sunlight. "Baron, she's lost her damn mind. Should we muzzle Max just to shut her up?" I grinned, swirling my drink. "Nope. Let her dig her own grave. I've got this under control." I dialed Tom, my lawyer and oldest friend from my early days flipping foreclosures. "Can she legally fine me for a dog barking?" Tom's laugh crackled through the phone. "Not unless Max is hosting a rock concert in your yard. She's bluffing. Got no ground to stand on. Get your files ready, Baron. This is your opening." I nodded, flipping through my Horizon Realty binders. I'd built a career, staying cool under pressure, snagging distressed properties while others panicked. And Karen was just another over-leveraged amateur, about to crash hard. Her absurdity wasn't breaking news to anyone here. Mrs. Ellis, the sweet widow next door, told me Karen fined her $180 last month because her hairdryer hummed too loud at 7 p.m. Karen dubbed it an unofficial quiet hour violation. Then there was the time Karen launched a noise patrol at 4 a.m., creeping through yards with a flashlight and that decibel meter, fining folks for running ceiling fans because of illegal humming noises. I'd snapped a photo of her an hour later, passed out on her lawn chair with her radio blaring disco hits, loud enough to shake the street. Hypocrisy was her calling card, and I had the receipts. Claire came up with a wild idea over dinner that night. What if we rig a fake speaker to make Max bark at random times? She'd lose it trying to catch him in the act. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my steak, wiping my eyes. You're diabolical, and I love it. But I've got a cleaner play in mind. I pulled out my Horizon Realty ledger from the drawer. 70% of the HOA's budget, parks, pools, streetlights, the works, flowed through my hands. I texted Tom, "All set? Karen's calling an emergency meeting Friday." His reply pinged back instantly. "Locked and loaded? She's toast." Thursday night, Karen's email blasted every inbox in the neighborhood. Emergency meeting Friday, 7 p.m. sharp, addressing noise violations and new regulations. I leaned back in my chair, swirling my bourbon, a faint smile tugging at my lips. She'd just handed me the keys to her own downfall. I spent the next hour sorting through my arsenal, financial records, asset deeds, 6 years of HOA meeting minutes I'd collected through proxies, tenants in the handful of nearby lots I'd quietly bought up over the years. I'd moved into this neighborhood to diversify my portfolio, picking up properties whenever someone bailed, but Karen's vendetta had turned it into a personal chess match. Max sprawled out beside me on the rug, snoring softly, his big head resting on my foot. I patted him gently. "Hang in there, buddy. She's about to eat her own rulebook." Friday dawned crisp and clear, and I caught Karen staking out my yard again, this time with binoculars glinting in the sunlight as Max barked once at a squirrel scampering across the lawn. She'd escalated from petty tyrant to full-on neighborhood stalker, scribbling notes like a mad scientist. I waved, all teeth and charm, and she scurried off, probably prepping her big moment at the meeting. Claire joined me on the porch, her coffee steaming in the cool air. "Binoculars? She's a cartoon villain come to life." I nodded, sipping my drink. "And I'm about to pull the trapdoor out from under her. 20 years flipping houses taught me one thing. The quiet guy with the cash always wins." Karen's campaign against Max wasn't just about noise. It was about control. She'd ruled this place like a dictator for years, doling out fines to keep everyone in line while her cronies got a free pass. I'd seen it in every meeting I'd monitored through my proxies. The way she'd smirk when someone tried to argue, the way she'd wave off complaints with that purple pen like it was a royal scepter. She'd fined Mr. Peterson for his blender, but let her husband's Harley roar unchecked. She'd banned Mrs. Jenkins' tricycle, but ignored her son's late-night bass thumping. It was a pattern, and I'd mapped it out meticulously. I'd mastered patience in this game, waiting out market crashes, outbidding hotshots with deeper pockets, turning crumbling buildings into profit machines. Karen was a gnat buzzing too close to a swatter, and I was ready to swing. Her emergency meeting was her stage, her moment to shine, but I'd steal the spotlight with a move she'd never anticipate. Max nuzzled my leg, his wet nose pressing against my knee, and I scratched his ears, plotting silently. She'd regret targeting my dog, my one soft spot in a career built on steel and strategy. I'd spent decades honing this instinct, knowing when to hold, when to fold, when to strike. In Miami, I'd flipped a row of condos right before the boom hit, pocketing millions while others scrambled. In Denver, I'd turned that strip mall into a cash cow while the seller kicked himself for letting it go cheap. Karen was no different, just another player overplaying her hand, blind to the fact that I'd already stacked the deck. The bourbon burned smooth down my throat as I watched the sun dip lower, casting long shadows across the street. Tomorrow night, she'd learn the cost of crossing a man who'd spent his life turning losses into wins. The community center buzzed Friday night, folding chairs groaning under the weight of restless neighbors packed shoulder to shoulder. Karen stood at the podium, her purple vest gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights, banging her gavel like she was judge, jury, and executioner rolled into one. "Order," she barked, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. As she fired up her PowerPoint presentation, the first slide flashed up, a blurry photo of Max mid-bark, his floppy ears caught in motion, blown up to ridiculous proportions. Next to it, a garish chart screamed, 15% property value drop due to uncontrolled pets in bold red letters. She'd roped in a sound expert, some greasy guy I recognized as her husband's insurance buddy, who shuffled to the front with a laptop and played a recording of Max barks, clocking them at 68 decibels. "Intolerable," Karen declared, slamming her notebook on the podium for emphasis. I bit back a snort. Her backyard ducks squawk louder than that every evening, and I've never seen a fine taped to her door. She launched into her grand reveal, her eyes glinting with manic glee. Effective immediately. Dogs are limited to 3 barks per day, with a $120 fine for each additional bark. All pets must wear mandatory anti-bark collars, non-negotiable. Mr. Peterson, sitting beside me with his arms crossed, muttered under his breath, "She training dogs for the silent film era now?" Karen waved her overstuffed notebook like a trophy. "I've logged 35 barks from Baron Carter's house in just 10 days. Clear intent to sabotage our serenity." 35 barks in 10 days? That's barely 3 a day. And she's spinning it like I'm running a kennel riot. The room split down the middle. Her loyalists in the front row clapped like trained seals, while others in the back rolled their eyes or whispered to their neighbors. I stood slowly, smoothing my tie with deliberate calm. "Point of order, Madam President." Karen's glare could have melted steel, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the podium. "You're not recognized, Mr. Carter," she snapped, her voice pitching up an octave. I kept my tone even, unflappable. "HOA bylaws, section 6.1, any member can speak before a vote is called." I cracked open my leather briefcase, pulling out a thick stack of papers and a neatly folded budget map, laying them on the table with a soft thud. "I think everyone here deserves to know who's really holding the HOA's purse strings." The air in the room went still. A collective breath held. I lifted a single deed, holding it up for all to see. Horizon Realty, my company, owns 70% of this HOA's budget and assets. Parks, pools, even that gavel you're clutching so tight. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave, phones popping out to record the moment. Karen fumbled her purple pen, letting it clatter to the floor, her face twisting as she shrieked, "Fraud!" I smirked, just a flicker. 4 lawyers and 3 auditors say otherwise. It's all legal, signed and sealed. I clicked on the projector remote, and the screen lit up with damning evidence. First up, a grainy video from last summer, Karen releasing 6 noisy ducks into the community pool, claiming it was a water quality stress test, then fining a group of kids $200 for contaminating it with their splashing. Next, a photo of her husband's delivery truck parked diagonally across 2 spaces overnight. 0 violations issued. Then the knockout punch. A $25,000 invoice she'd billed to the HOA for a top-of-the-line treadmill tagged as community fitness equipment, installed in her basement next to her wine fridge. The room erupted in shouts and murmurs. Mrs. Ellis stood, her frail voice trembling with rage. "She fined me for my hairdryer the day after my husband's funeral, but her son's car alarm blares every night. No one says a word." I pressed on, my voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. For 6 years, I've watched this board bleed us dry with fines while dodging real issues, like the potholes her contractor buddy promised to fix 3 years ago but never touched. I tossed a thick folder onto the table, papers spilling slightly for effect. Every shady expense, every selective fine. It's all here, documented down to the penny. Karen lunged for her water glass, splashing it down her purple vest in a panic, choking out, "Lies, all lies!" But the tide had turned. Faces hardened against her, eyes narrowing as the truth sank in. I'd flipped bigger flops than this HOA in my career. Warehouses rotting in rust belts, motels with cracked foundations, entire city blocks written off as lost causes. Karen was just another bad bet, overconfident and underprepared, and I'd called her bluff with a royal flush. Max's barks were my line in the sand, and she'd stomped right over it, oblivious to the trap snapping shut. I stood there, hands clasped behind my back, watching her squirm as the room turned into a hornet's nest of anger and disbelief. She'd underestimated me, thinking I was just some quiet guy with a noisy dog, not a man who'd spent decades turning losses into victories with nothing but patience and a sharp eye. The evidence kept rolling. I showed a screenshot of an email she'd sent to her inner circle. "Keep the fines coming. My new patio furniture isn't paying for itself." Laughter mixed with outrage from the crowd. Then a time-stamped photo from my security cam, Karen measuring Mrs. Jenkins' tricycle wheel at 6 a.m. ruler in hand while her son's car stereo thumped across the street. Mr. Peterson stood up, his voice booming. "She fined my blender, but her husband's Harley shakes my house every Sunday. Where's his ticket?" The room was a powder keg now, and I'd just lit the fuse. Karen tried to regain control, banging her gavel so hard it cracked, shouting, "This is out of order!" But no one was listening anymore. Her loyalists shrank in their seats, avoiding eye contact, while the rest of the neighbors leaned forward, hungry for more. I'd spent years in boardrooms and backrooms, facing down developers and bankers with more clout than Karen could dream of, and I knew how to play a crowd. This wasn't just about Max. It was about every petty fine, every ignored complaint, every dollar she'd siphoned off for herself. I'd turned her game against her, and she didn't even see the board tilting. I cut through the uproar, my voice steady and commanding. I moved to dissolve this board. New elections, fair rules, no more bar-counting insanity. Mr. Peterson seconded it fast, his gravelly voice echoing mine. Hands shot up across the room like a forest sprouting, a landslide of agreement. Karen bolted for the door, her purple vest flapping, yelling, "Meeting's over!" I called after her, calm as ever. "Not without a majority vote." And I've got it right here. She froze mid-step, clutching her notebook like a lifeline, her face pale as the realization hit. Her throne was dust. A week later, she sued me, claiming I had illegally seized the HOA with my financial takeover. Tom dismantled her in court like a pro. We rolled out the heavy artillery, emails of her gloating about using fine money to fund a wine cellar, thanks to the noisemakers for my Merlot stash, and doorbell cam footage of her fining Mrs. Ellis for that hairdryer while the poor woman was still recovering from heart surgery. The judge's gavel came down hard, ordering her to repay $95,000 in unjust fines she'd pocketed over the years. She slunk out of town days later, leaving a for sale sign crooked in her yard and a busted decibel meter tossed in the bushes like a bad memory. The HOA crumbled under her exit, but I didn't let it die. I reshaped it. With my 70% stake, I pushed for a new board, folks like Mr. Peterson and Mrs. Ellis, people who'd felt Karen's sting firsthand. We scrapped her barking limits, set reasonable noise rules, and turned the park into a dog-friendly zone. Karen's reign was over, and I'd flipped it like any other bad deal, clean, quiet, and final. The new HOA took shape fast after Karen's fall, and I made sure it was nothing like her reign of terror. With my 70% stake in the budget, I pushed for a board of regular folks. Mr. Peterson with his gruff wisdom, Mrs. Ellis with her quiet strength, people who'd borne the brunt of Karen's petty fines and lived to tell the tale. We scrapped her barking quotas first thing, green-lighting dogs to woof within reason, no more counting each yap like some deranged mathematician. The park, now technically mine, hosted a puppy dash that first weekend. Kids and dogs tearing around, tails wagging, laughter bouncing off the trees. I stood by the fence, coffee in hand, watching Max bound after a tennis ball with a pack of new pals. I dubbed the place Barkwood Estates, and word spread fast. Property values spiked 15% in a month as families flocked to a neighborhood that didn't gag their pets or fine their kids for giggling too loud. Karen didn't vanish quietly, of course. A month later, a whiny letter landed in my mailbox from her new address 2 states over. She griped about her new HOA fining her precious ducks for quacking too much. Ironic considering she'd tried to silence Max for less. I chuckled, grabbed my phone, and texted back, "Enjoy their 3-quack limit, Your Majesty." Claire caught me grinning and peeked over my shoulder. She's getting a taste of her own medicine? I nodded, sipping my brew. Karma's got a mean bite. The image of Karen arguing with some new tyrant over duck decibels was almost too sweet to imagine. Almost. Max woofs at kids tossing balls across the street now, his big, goofy bark echoing freely, and I watch from my porch, the morning sun warming my face. The neighborhood's alive again. Bikes zipping down driveways, folks chatting over fences. The kind of place I'd always figured it could be beneath Karen's iron fist. Her moving truck had rolled out under cover of night, that for sale sign swaying in her yard like a white flag. I heard she tried selling that busted decibel meter at a garage sale before she left. $5, no takers. Fitting end for her reign. 20 years flipping properties taught me more than just how to spot a deal. It showed me winning isn't always about owning the whole damn world. Sometimes it's simpler, letting your dog bark free on your own turf, turning a bully's game against her with a silent checkmate. I'd turned crumbling warehouses into lofts, foreclosed shacks into homes. But this flip felt different. Personal. Karen thought she'd break me with her fines, but I'd broken her empire with patience and a ledger. Max flopped beside me, panting happily, and I scratched his ears, thinking how the best revenge isn't loud. It's the quiet kind that leaves you standing while the other guy's packing boxes. So that's how I turned Karen's HOA nightmare into a win for Max and every dog in Barkwood Estates. If you enjoyed watching her crash and burn under the weight of her own purple pen, stick around. I've got plenty more stories where this came from petty tyrants to real estate revenge. I'll spill the beans on every deal and every showdown. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss a single tale of triumph over the Karens of the world. Trust me, you'll want front row seats for what's next.